maybe briefly describe the mission of the American Civil Liberties Union?
Well, the mission of the American Civil Liberties Union is to defend the American Bill of Rights. And the ACLU, as we call it, was founded in 1920, right after World War I, in response to a number of places where we thought that our government was really violating some of our fundamental principles, including prosecuting people criminally for expressing dissident views during the war, people who opposed the draft or complained about the war itself. And then right after World War I, there were also what were called the Palmer raids, where the government was rounding up people and deporting them because they thought they were anarchists. And thousands of people were rounded up and deported with really no good reason to suspect them of anything, other than that they looked foreign. And so that was sort of the birth of the organization. And ever since then, for 90-some years, we've been doing the same kinds of things, defending freedom and due process. And we have a range of issues, about 16 different issues. I can tell you some of our current priorities, if you're interested. Okay, among the current priorities are voting rights. We have a real issue about equality of opportunity to vote. Our criminal justice policies, including over-incarceration. We lock up far too many people, and the ACLU is fighting that as a matter of policy. Reproductive freedom, women's rights, LGBT rights. We've been very involved in the battle for same-sex marriage. And I could go on. We really have about 16 different areas.
Okay, wow. So that's a lot of topics that you're covering. And you actually defend those who cannot defend themselves. That's the mission, which is an admirable one. Over the 20 years you have served the cause. Could you observe any particular trends, maybe also among different generations?
Okay, very interesting question. One of the principal founders of the ACLU, a man named Roger Baldwin, said that no battle for civil liberties ever remains won. And I think he was really right about that. So when you look back to 1920, they were having issues about people who were suspected as terrorists were being locked up without due process. There were issues about women's reproductive freedom, all sorts of issues about equality, about freedom of speech, and we have exactly the same issues today. So what I found, if you look back over our history, it's like there's a pendulum that swings back and forth, and sometimes we feel like we're making progress on one issue, and then it goes back. So all of a sudden we thought that we had already won the right for reproductive freedom for women, and now many of the states in the United States are really becoming very restrictive. So what I find is I think that there's not much difference among the generations in terms of what people expect or believe about their rights, but there is a difference in terms of people's knowledge of history and awareness of what might happen to them. So I've met a lot of young women, for example, who say that they're not feminists, they don't need to worry, women are treated equally. And they don't understand the history of the unequal treatment and how some of that history is still with us. There are people who assume that they're always going to have the right to reproductive freedom. And again, they don't understand that that was something that happened and it wasn't always like that. So I think there's a kind of a different perspective in terms of the sense of the immediacy of threat to our civil liberties.
That seems very logic. Actually, staying maybe with young people, the recent uprisings all over the world, or maybe touching briefly on Brazil, are just an example of how young people engage in politics. Do you believe that we're living in a world with growing tensions between the generations?
I think there are growing tensions between the generations, but not so much in the areas where I work about civil liberties. I think the tensions come more in economic areas where the older generations, you want their pensions, and the younger generations don't want to be spending all their money supporting the older generations. But I think that we all really are working in common in the area of civil liberties. And I've found that, I think, again, young people aren't always that aware of the problems and the issues and, kind of willing to take a role. But I'll tell you, one of my personal heroes, a woman named Beth Tinker, when she was in high school, this is now decades ago, wanted to protest the war in Vietnam. So she wore a black armband to her high school in Iowa in the United States one day. And the principal told her she couldn't do that because that was disruptive. So she ended up bringing a lawsuit. The ACLU represented her. It went all the way to our Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said she had the right to express her views in school. So she is now on the board of one of our ACLU affiliates. And she travels around the country talking to high school students about their rights. And I think it's really a wake-up call for a lot of young people that you can fight back. Because we have similar problems today where the high school principal says, no, you can't do that. You can't express your point of view. We have high school students who are being disciplined for things that they say on the internet, what they post on their Facebook page. And there are problems in a lot of schools with bullying of other students. So she's somebody who I think is really making the young people aware of the problems. But I don't see it as oppositional at all. I think we're all on the same side when it comes to the idea that everybody should have rights. It's just that there are a lot of people who think that younger people are not mature enough to decide for themselves. And we don't believe that.
I agree with you on that. Thank you very much for your time, Mrs. Herman. It has been a great pleasure.
My pleasure.